Have you ever wanted to play big bomb creatures like Consecrated Sphinx, Nyx Bloom Ancient and entirely Primal Storm, but haven't been able to because of their mana values? Do you want to play a big combat-based creature deck that's resilient to removal and gets more dangerous the longer a game goes? Or maybe you just want to play a deck with high card quality where every card feels like it's a big splashy play? If so, then let's get started. Let's begin by having a look at our commander and seeing what direction it wants to take us. Maelstrom Wanderer is a 7/5 elemental that reads, creatures you control have haste. It also has Cascade, which reads, when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order, then do it again. So from that we have two directions that the commander wants to take us towards. Firstly, we want to play creatures, particularly ones that benefit from haste, and secondly, we want to cascade into spells that generally give us the biggest bang for our buck. Now, filling up a deck with 6 to 7 drops is generally a bad idea if you want it to be playable in most playgroups, but that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, before you think I've lost my mind, just hear me out, because there is a way we can make this work. It just requires thinking ramp. Big ramp. So to begin with, in our 1 mana value slot, we have Orcish Lumberjack. Being able to generate 3 mana so early will cause your opponents to actually fear this little orc, as he can not only consistently ensure a turn 4 commander, he can also quickly accelerate into any 6 to 7 drops in hand. For our artifacts, we have included Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Talisman of Curiosity and Talisman of Impulse, all rocks capable of producing the colours we need. For our land ramp, we have Farseek, Into the North, Nature's Law, Rampant Growth, 3 Visits and Sakura Tribe Elder. They not only fix us for colours, but also provide us with the most removal resistant form of ramp. For our creatures, we have Elysian Caryatid. This mana dork taps for 1 mana of any colour early, but in the late game can consistently tap for 2. After this we have Bloom Tender, which can tap for up to 3 mana in this deck, and lastly, the Commander All-Star Dockside Extortionist, which can easily help us accelerate into our commander or big bombs in our hand. Moving on to our 3 mana value ramp, we have Cultivate and Kodama's Reach for land ramp, as well as ensuring we make a land drop the next turn. For our creatures, we have Somberwold Sage, which tapping for 3 creature mana means we can quickly cast our commander or any big creatures in hand. We also have Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, which not only taps for creature mana, but also acts as a secondary win condition for our deck. Reaching the requirement of having creatures with total power 8 or greater isn't difficult at all for this deck, and allows us to fight through opponents that may be running anti-combat cards such as Constant Mists. Next up is Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. One of the strongest mana dorks we have available to play in Commander, she definitely pulls her weight in this list. With Wanderer out, she taps for a whopping 7 mana, and the ability to filter it into whatever colours we need means she can quickly empty our hand. But not only this, she also has card draw attached to her as well, and with the high power of most of our creatures in the deck, we are sure to draw a card or 2 off this ability. Finally, rounding out our 3-drop slot, we have another creature which serves both a ramp and card draw role, and that is Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. A semi-reliable ramp and draw piece early. In the late game, however, we can escape it with haste, benefiting off of its draw and ramp ability twice the first time it comes down, and later having consistent draw and ramp every time it attacks. Uro definitely has a place in this deck. Now moving on to our 4 mana value ramp, using cards that many lists these days have moved away from since the format has increased in speed. Starting with our only artifact, Thran Dynamo, this rock simply provides a big mana return on its initial investment and helps us quickly get to our bombs or commander. For our land ramp, we are running Circuitous Route, Migration Path, Ranger's Path, Skyshroud Claim and Vastwood Surge. All of them ramp us 2 lands for the cost of 4 mana, though Skyshroud Claim is the best of them because it is the only spell where the lands come in untapped. Vastwood Surge does have a kicker ability, but I've never used it and I doubt you will either, but having options is always nice. Our 1 creature in this slot is Arixmethy's Slumbering Isle. It not only acts as mana ramp, but in the mid to late game becomes a huge beater to help us close out the game. Not only this, but its high power toughness stat synergizes with other cards in the deck as well. For example, with Selvala out, she will now tap for a huge 12 mana. So that rounds out our ramp package for the deck, and as you can see, it's quite a lot. In fact, it takes up 28 slots in the deck. However, it's a necessary evil if we want to be able to play all the big bombs in our deck, while also being resilient to the control players at the table. It's also why you'll probably notice that we run so much land ramp in the deck. But speaking of bombs, let's see what all this ramp's getting us into. Our bombs, both big and small, can be divided into 3 broad categories. Those that provide card advantage, those that provide us with a mana acceleration, whether this be actual mana or simply cheating costs, and lastly those that interact with our opponents. In this last category, for simplicity's sake, I've also included cards that are alternate win conditions or accelerate our primary beatdown plan, because honestly, killing your opponents quicker is a form of interaction in a way. First up is Sylvan Library, a card many consider a green staple. For us, this card serves multiple purposes. It ensures we hit land drops and ramp spells if it comes down early, and mid to late game it helps control the top of our deck so we have some control over what our commander cascades into. Next is Greater Good, which not only serves as good card advantage and selection, but also as a sack outlet to make sure we can recast Maelstrom Wanderer for additional value. There will be some games where you have spat out your hand ramping into Wanderer with no additional plays over the next few turns if it doesn't die. That's when you'll be glad to have Greater Good on your board. In less frequent circumstances, it will protect your commander from lock effects such as Kenrith's Transformation and Oubliette. Cards which I just have to say should see more play in casual commander. After that we have Garrick's Uprising, which not only provides card advantage upon itself or our big creatures entering the battlefield, but also provides trample, which is so important in decks looking to go tall with their creatures. Another enchantment which benefits from our creatures entering the battlefield is the Great Henge, which pulls double duty as both a card draw and ramp piece. Not only this, but with our commander out it only costs 2 green to cast. It almost feels like this enchantment was made for the Wanderer. And though the life gain and +1 counters it provides almost seem forgettable, there will be games where this will make that important difference. I mean, most games of commander are won and lost by 1 more turn, 1 more creature, 1 more life. But moving on, we have Garrick Primal Hunter, whose -3 ability allows us to draw cards based on the highest power creature we have on the board. Whether it's our commander or other big creatures in the deck, Garrick will be drawing us 6 to 7 cards consistently. He also has the side benefit of being able to make 3/3 beast tokens if we don't need the draw ability straight away, and if the situation allows it, that ultimate ability to make 6/6 worms based on the number of lands we have can end the game quickly if we reach it. Zendikar Resurgent is simple but effective, not only drawing us cards upon casting our creatures, but also doubling the mana we make from our lands, keeping us in the game when the removal is coming on strong. Rishgar's Expertise has always been a powerful card, but here it really pulls its weight, consistently drawing us 6 to 7 cards while also casting a 5 mana value card or less for free. Not much else needs to be said. I mean, even casting it off a cascade trigger with no creatures on board doesn't feel horrible if we still get to cast a 4 to 5 drop. Our last enchantment in this category is Sunbirds Invocation. I know that some will point out straight away that this is a non-bo with Maelstrom Wanderer's cascade ability, and they would be right. But the power of this card, especially in this deck where the mana value of many of the cards are so high, still makes it worthy of inclusion. When you see it in action once, you'll have no doubt why it's definitely earned its place here. Moving on to the creatures, we have the commander favourite Consecrated Sphinx. This really needs no explanation. It is simply one of the best card draw engines in the format and can have you move from being behind to ahead in 1 turn cycle. Prime Speaker Zagana draws us cards based on the highest power creature on the board, which then also buffs her into a big beater to be used later for combat. One downside with her is that you will feel a little bad if you cascade into her with no creatures on board, as she will only draw 2 cards upon ETB from checking herself, but just her raw draw power is still enough to keep her included. The previously mentioned Uro, when escaped from the graveyard, can act as card draw and ramp if we draw into lands or have lands left over in our hand after one of our big card draw effects. AC, Tyrant of Gaia Strait, like Uro, performs double duty by drawing us cards every time a land enters the battlefield and can ramp us by letting us play an extra land every turn. Which I do have to point out is one of the really big strengths of this deck, utilising cards that act as both card draw and ramp. It really gives the deck this kind of inevitability that your opponents really struggle to break through. Nezahal Primal Tide will be a thorn in the control or non-creature player's side, drawing us cards from every non-creature spell being cast. Not only this, but it protects itself by not being counterable and also allowing you to discard 3 cards so that it exiles itself and returns at the next end step, dodge and removal. Oh, and you'll also have no maximum hand size for all those cards you'll be drawing. Keep this around and your hand will never be empty. Atali Primal Storm can generate us some great value by casting spells for free from the top of everyone's library, including our own. And really the top of our library is likely to be where we will get the most value from, but hidden removal or other key pieces from opponents may just come in clutch when we need it. The random nature of a Tali like Wanderer just makes it a lot of fun to play. To finish off this category is Emodi, Celebrant of Bounty, a card you will be rarely sad to see, and your opponents will be quick to kill ASAP. Emodi gives all of our 6 mana value or greater spells Cascade, which will typically get us into our other bombs, or on the lower end of the curve ramp spells, which will allow us to cast more bombs in the future. With Emodi out, your opponents will definitely be on a clock before things get really out of hand. So now that we've discussed our card advantage spells, let's move on to ones that help us accelerate our mana or cheat mana costs. The first on this list is Nyx Bloom Ancient. What else needs to be said? If you can untap with this in play, it is very likely your opponents will lose the game that turn, or at least be at a point of no return. I mean, what can your opponents do when facing down a Bloom Tender, Orcish Lumberjack, or Thran Dynamo that taps for 9 mana? Or even worse, a Selvala that can tap for 21. Clouth, Unrivaled Ancient, will turn all of our hasty beaters into a massive mana ritual that will allow us to set up a game-winning board state. And one of the big strengths of Clouth is that you don't even need to connect with damage to get the mana generating effect. The fact that Clouth also has haste means you can get him down before Wanderer comes down and immediately get a 4 mana refund to hopefully cast another ramp spell in your hand. His mana ability is only limited to casting spells, but in most instances it won't make a difference in this deck. Similar to Clouth in some ways, but different in others, is Old Norbone. While Old Norbone does require you to connect with creatures to generate mana, he does make treasure tokens, which is far superior to Clouth's until end of turn mana limitation. But like Clouth, landing Old Norbone will usually generate you enough mana and subsequently cast enough spells to put your opponents between a rock and a hard place. And to be honest, having either of these creatures, or the next creature we're going to discuss, come in off of Wanderer's Cascade ability has usually resulted in me winning the game either that turn or the following turn after. And speaking of that next creature, next up is Kodama of the East Tree. If any of you have come up against this as a commander or in the 99, you will know he does some work. And as you can imagine, in this deck full of 6 and 7 drops, he really pulls double time. Cast a land ramp spell, put some lands into play for free. Cast a 7-drop creature, put another 7-drop creature into play. And the fact that these are being cheated in by triggered abilities means that counter spells will not be able to stop this. Kodama, along with Clouth and Old Norbone, are really what put this creature-heavy version of Maelstrom Wanderer into overdrive. Moving on to our non-creature pieces, first up is Food Chain. This plays a significant role in not only exiling Wanderer so we can recast it for more cascades, but more importantly, providing most of the mana to do so. Exiling Wanderer and producing 9 mana so we can recast it for 10 means we only need 1 spare mana to do so. This mana refund will allow you to recast Wanderer several times, and when it becomes difficult to do so, you can just further exile the creatures you're cascading into to allow the recast shenanigans to continue. Genesis Ultimatum will bring you joy every time you cast it, allowing you to potentially cheat in permanents with mana values much higher than the 7 it costs. And the great thing is, any non-permanents you hit go straight to your hand, so it acts like a card draw spell in worst case scenarios. I've had times where Genesis Ultimatum just put 1 7-drop and 2 lands into play, while putting 2 cards in hand, and it still felt pretty good. Either way, it's a lot of fun to resolve. Speaking of another fun card to resolve, one that can involve your friends in the fun, is Selvala's Stampede. Choosing wild or free, each wild vote reveals cards till you hit a creature and put it into play. Each free vote puts a permanent card from your hand into play for free. Either way, the Stampede will usually spell big trouble for your opponents. One thing to note though, your opponents will almost always choose free, so that they make you spend the cards in your hand, so you will usually want to vote wild unless all 4 cards in your hand are just too good. And to round out this category is Lurking Predators, a card that puts your opponents into a real conundrum. If they play into the Predators, they risk running into an overwhelming horde the next turn, but if they hold back casting spells, they slow down their own game plan. Either way, it puts us in a great position, where at worst it scries the top of our library to hit the spell we need next turn. With the card advantage and mana acceleration cards out of the way, let's get into cards that interact with our opponent or help us win the game quicker. First up is Balefire Dragon, who can wipe the opponent's board of creatures when it deals combat damage to them. Particularly effective against the token, creature heavy or go wide player. Next is Drakaseth, who can snipe problematic creatures off the board or go directly to face when looking to close the game out. Kogla the Titanate pulls multiple duties in removing a creature and any problematic enchantments or artifacts repeatably. And the haste granted by Wanderer means you can do both in the same turn. Hullbreaker Horror not only comes in with impressive stats as a 7/8 uncounterable creature with flash, but can also bounce any problem non-land permanents, including blockers, so we can win the game. It also serves additional utility by bouncing our own cards back to our hand, cards like Dockside Extortionist and our commander to be reused and abused again. Although we can't take advantage of the bouncing spells back to hand with the deck's current build, what it already does is more than enough for our needs. Coma, Cosmos Serpent, can act as a control piece against our opponents, tapping down problematic permanents, whilst also being able to protect itself, both on the stack by being uncounterable, and on the field by being able to grant itself indestructibility. You will find you will have games where this tap ability will make all the difference. Against a Voltron commander, stop them from attacking you. Troublesome Planeswalker, keep them from ever activating and take it out with your big creatures. Down to a 1v1, tap their mana rocks and keep them down long enough to finish them off. Morag, Fury of Akum, takes advantage of our land drops and land ramp by giving us a way to quickly close out the game. If you untap with Morag, you can expect an average of 2 to 4 extra combat steps on average, which should be more than enough to close out the game. Not to mention that on top of the extra combats, as if that wasn't enough, your creatures get a +1/+0 buff for each time they've attacked that turn. Morag, really good. Sometimes though, our creature board state won't be the scariest and we'll need a way to clear our opponent's creatures out. Enter Sarkhan's Unsealing, which couldn't be a better fit for this deck. Casting creatures with power 4 to 6 will be able to deal 4 damage to any target, but power 7 or greater will deal 4 damage to each opponent and each creature or planeswalker they control. There are about 8 creatures in this deck, including our commander, that can meet this power 7 requirement, so having Sarkhan's Unsealing stick around usually means our opponents will struggle to keep creatures on the board and their life total in a healthy place. As you can probably see by now, we can definitely bring in a lot of damage, but sometimes we want to speed this process up. Every turn we give our opponents to live is another turn they can find answers to our shenanigans or win the game themselves. So in comes Fiery Emancipation, one of the most reddest cards currently in existence. Imagine tripling the damage of just some of the previously mentioned cards. Cards like Sarkhan's Unsealing, dealing 12 to each opponent or creature and planeswalker they control. Cards like Drakaseth, on attack dealing 12 damage to one target and 9 to 2 others. This isn't even counting the standard tripled combat damage, where an unblocked Maelstrom Wanderer can mean a one-hit kill to an opponent. When Fiery Emancipation hits the battlefield, the sun's about to get real low. Despite all this, there will be times we may not be able to win the game through combat damage. Maybe an opponent has an ensnaring bridge out, or can repeatedly cast Constant Mists or Spore Frog. In such cases, a non-combat damage way to victory is needed. This is where Terror of the Peaks enters. Every creature that enters the battlefield allows us to direct that damage to our opponent's face if needed, or any other target where necessary. Although not included in this list, you will find if you frequently come up against cards that shut down the combat step, you may want to find a place for Warstorm Surge in the deck, which has the same effect. So that rounds out the card advantage, mana acceleration, and interaction cards. Let's wrap up the discussion with some utility cards as well as lands. First is Team of Sabertooth, which allows us to bounce our commander back to our hand to be recast for additional cascade triggers. It can also act as a protection piece in a pinch if one of our creatures is really locking the board down hard. Next is Eternal Witness, here to perform the simple but important function of recurring any cards from our graveyard that may have been removed earlier. Pair it with Team of Sabertooth and we can do this repeatedly. Ancient Tomb helps us accelerate into our commander as well as other big mana cards. When the average mana value of our deck is this high, we need all the help we can get. Sanctum of Eternity is an additional way to bounce our commander back to our hands, which greatly helps when we don't get down any of our card advantage engines on board. Seagate Restoration and Turntimber Symbiosis pull extra duty here big time, by not only acting as an untapped land when needed, but also by being cast from Wanderer's Cascade ability. Both effects, Seagate's card draw and no maximum hand size effect, and Turntimber's ability to selectively cheat in a creature are very much abused here. Finally, we have Field of the Dead. Our deck runs a lot of land ramp and won't find it hard to hit the 7 land quota that Field demands from us. This will allow us to apply further combat pressure and recovery from board wipes, while also making late game land ramp more useful. The rest of the lands have been selected to help with colour fixing with a particular focus on producing green mana. And that's the deck. This creature-focused version of Maelstrom Wanderer is a ton of fun to play and is probably one of my favourite decks that I own in paper right now. If you have any other questions about the deck list, feel free to post it in the comments. I'll leave the deck list in the description below. Also, if you want to see the deck in action, check out the channel where we'll have some gameplay videos available. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.